Hi, welcome back to Educator.com's AP Music Theory course. Today's lesson is on cadences. So for this lesson, we're just going to go over different cadence types and practice writing them in different keys. So the first one we'll go over is the perfect authentic cadence, and then we'll look at imperfect authentic cadences, and then we'll look at what half cadences are, plagal cadence, and finally the deceptive cadence at the end. So the first one to look at is the perfect authentic cadence, and of course this is the most final sounding and complete cadence. So of course it involves the dominant chord resolving to the tonic chord. So if we're in good old C major, this is going to be a 5 chord moving to a 1 chord, but there's some other features of it that make it perfect as opposed to the imperfect one we'll look at next. So let's start with the bass line, which is always a given here, G to C. And then what's important about this cadence is that in the melody, the uppermost voice, the soprano, in the final chord, we've always have the first scale degree, or of course the root. So we can work backwards from here. Maybe we had the B here, moving to the C, and then the G, staying on G, and then D, moving up to an E. So this would be an example of perfect authentic cadence. Let's look at one of these in minor. So what about D minor? So in D minor, of course, remember the 5 is always altered to become a major chord in minor, especially when we're talking about cadences. So we'll start with bass line, A to D, and then we know that it's perfect authentic, so we need 1 in the top voice. So, and maybe this time it was approached, let's see, well, let's keep it C sharp. So there's the altered leading tone going up to D, and then we have A and an E, and so maybe the E moves down to D and the A moves down to F, and this gives us a complete chord. Oh no, it doesn't. Let's see. So I forgot to keep the common tone. So there's that. A staying with A, and the E goes up a half step to F, and this looks like a C, but it's a D. So there's the perfect authentic cadence, 1 in major, 1 in minor. So the imperfect authentic cadence is basically a 5, it's an authentic cadence, so it's still going to be 5 to 1. But the difference is that it's just going to have some feature that makes it different from the perfect authentic. So it could be that it's a 5 not in root position going to 1. So what about this bass line would be B up to C. And so let's finish out this chord. So B, D, G, D, moving to C, and then E, keep the common tone, G, C. So here's an example of one kind of imperfect authentic cadence, and maybe a more straightforward one would be one with a root position 5 to 1, but instead of having the tonic in the top voice, maybe we're left with the third, so it doesn't quite sound as final. So let's see here how this could work. So D, G, B, D. So G stays to G, and B moves up to C. So here's an example of another imperfect authentic cadence. Okay, half cadences. These are also very common in forms, but not, of course, at the end of pieces. So half cadence is when we stop on the 5 chord instead of moving all the way through to the 1. And of course the 5 can be preceded by just about anything. Could be from a 1 to a 5. Let's do this in G major. So I'll add the key signature. So could go from G to D and stop there. So let's see, G, B, D. So we want to keep the common tone D and then move these voices as closely as possible. So here's an example of a half cadence in G major. Let's do one in minor. What about the relative minor, E minor? So this time let's precede it by a different chord. So we know we need to end up on this altered 5 chord. And what if we're coming from a 4 this time? So we're starting with A minor, A, C, E, and we're going up to 5. So this is an example of roots moving by a second. So we know we have to watch out for contrary motion. We have to be sure to include contrary motion, watch out for parallel motion. So let's see, how can we do this? We can move the A down to the F sharp, the C down to a B, and the E down to our raised leading tone D sharp. And so here is an example of a half cadence in minor. Okay, next cadence type is plagal cadence. This cadence is by far less common. If it does occur in a piece of tonal music, it's usually after some sort of authentic cadence has already happened. And the plagal cadence is kind of that church amen sounding one, which is a 4 chord going to a 1 chord. So let's look at that in F major. So in F, of course, the 4 chord is B flat major, going to F major. And let's start with a nice spacing. So what about F, B flat, D flat? And then all we want to do is make sure we have smooth voice leading. So keep the common tone F, move the B flat to A, and the D to C. And here's a plagal cadence in F major. And let's do one in a minor key. What about A minor? So minor 4 moving to a minor 1 in this case. So the bass line would be D to A, and then we just need our D minor triad. And then we'll move it down in the same way, keeping the common tone, and then moving the other voices as closely as possible. So here's a plagal cadence in a minor and a major key. And finally, let's look at deceptive cadences. So deceptive cadence is when we are set up for an authentic cadence by a 5 chord, and then instead of moving to the expected 1, we move to some other chord, which is almost always a 6 chord. So let's see this in C major. So we've got this dominant chord here, G, B, D, and now we see this is another example of roots moving up a second, so we need to be careful of contrary motion, or be careful of parallel motion. But the other thing we need to do is make sure that the leading tone proceeds up to C. So that's kind of a given that we need to include here. And then this G, we need to move it down to E. And now we see that we've got an A, a C, and an E. And our conventional wisdom tells us that we need an A. But in this case, that's not going to be possible. So we need to move this D somewhere else. So we can't move it to an E, because that'll give us parallel fifths. But what we can do is double the C. So we'll see that in deceptive cadences, this second chord will have often a different kind of disposition, or there'll be a different sort of voice leading here because of the necessity of the leading tone. Let's do one of these in a minor key. What about, let's see, Let's do D minor. So we're moving from 5 to 6. So that means, oh, in this case, of course, it's going to be a major chord. So the bass line will move from A to B flat. And let's say we've got this A major chord here, C sharp, E, A. So we know that the C sharp has to move to D because it's the leading tone. And then we can't move the E to an F, so let's again double the D there, so we're doubling the third. And then we need an F, so we can move this A down a third, let's see, to F. So there's the deceptive cadence in major and minor. Okay, and of course, examples of this would be questions asking for a certain kind of cadence in a certain key. So let's say we're given the key of D major and we're asked to supply a perfect authentic cadence. So we immediately know that it's going to be 5, 1, and here's the key signature. So bass line is the easy part, A to D. And looking back, we know we need a perfect authentic, so we know that the top voice is going to be a D. And from there, we can just work backwards. So C sharp, A, E, and then keep the common tone A and move the E to an F sharp to give us a complete D major chord. And here's the perfect authentic in D major. Okay, for example 2, let's practice labeling a cadence. So what if we're in F major, and we see something like this. So first we want to figure out what chords these are. So they're both in root position. So looking at the bass line, we see that this is a 5 going to a 1. So this is going to be some sort of authentic cadence. We want to see, is it authentic or perfect or imperfect? And the 1 chord here does not have the first scale degree in the top voice. So that means this is an imperfect authentic cadence. Okay, and for the third example, let's say we are asked for, or given the key of A minor, and we're asked for a plagal cadence. So first we need to figure out what Roman numerals that is. So plagal cadence is 4 to 1, and that in turn gives us the bass line, D to A. And now all we need to do is connect 2 chords whose roots are a fourth apart, which we've done many times. So let's choose a nice closed spacing, and then follow our rules, keeping the common tone A and moving the other voices as closely as possible. And for the last example, let's say we're asked to supply, again in a minor key. Let's say we're in, what about C minor? And we're asked for a half cadence. So we'll write the key signature for C minor. And then we know that a half cadence ends on 5 and that we can precede it with any chord that we want. So let's precede it with a 1 chord. So C, G, C, E flat. And of course the bass line here is going to be C to G. And then we need to keep the common tone G. And then we'll move the C down to B and the E flat down the D. And of course the most common error that people tend to make here is they forget that this B is a B flat and it needs to be raised to a B natural to give us the dominant chord that we're going to leave this cadence hanging on. All right, thanks again for visiting educator.com's AP Music Theory course. See you next time.